episode of Witty CFB here. We got Preston of Trash Talk Tailgate, a friend of the show. He's been, on a bunch of times. And, Preston, for those of you who haven't watched Trash Talk Tailgate, can you just give everybody a little soundbite of what to expect if you tune in?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, I am a college football coach. I've been a D1 coach. I've been at a few different Division I schools. I worked my way up from the D3 ranks. And I just love talking ball. So I have a podcast called the Trash Talk Tailgate. It's on YouTube. It's on all social medias at Trash Talk Tailgate. We do live streams. We do our Sunday 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time college football reaction live stream. That is by far our most popular. We do our Tuesday 2 p.m. Eastern Time NFL recap live stream. That's gaining popularity as well. And then we've got our Friday 7:30 Eastern Time p.m. Eastern Time predictions live stream that we go in and predict all the biggest games from college and the NFL. We love talking ball, man. We're right way more often than we're wrong. We call things, we predict things, and whenever we do that, they usually happen. We really know ball. I've worked in it. Football is my entire life. I love it, and come talk ball with us. Come join the tailgate. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you, plugging that out there, and I'll obviously put the, link to your show and all your other social medias in the description. And, Preston, this obviously such an unprecedented coaching carousel in the sense of, the midseason firings and, all these big openings kind of coming up. And, I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around it because, by this time of the year, I'm used to talking X's and O's, not necessarily about coaching searches until late December or January or whatever that time frame is. But, as we kind of look in the rearview mirror a little bit and we're kind of, discussing these different openings. I mean, obviously the big three right now are LSU, Florida, and Penn State, and all of them have their pros and cons for good, bad, or indifferent. So Preston, with that said, as you kind of look at these three different openings and very distinct in different ways, but, in your mind, I guess it's going to be a loaded question. So two questions. One, what in your opinion is the best job opening out of the three? And I guess two, what should each program be looking for in terms of a coach, or what is that kind of missing piece that can kind of propel them to that next level, which for all of them should be a national championship?
I think LSU is a top 3 job in the entire sport of college football. Before they hired Brian Kelly, their last 3 coaches, Nick Saban, Les Miles, Ed Orgeron, all won a national championship. So yes, obviously Nick Saban is a great coach, potentially the GOAT. But to me, that speaks more to the program and the fact that you had 3 different coaches win a championship. The only other program that's done that this century is Ohio State. And you could argue those are the 2 best programs in the entire country. So for me, LSU is by far number 1. Number 2, I think, is Florida. It's obviously in the great state of Florida. There's a lot of talent in the state, but you do have to compete with Miami and Mario Cristobal and that elite level recruiting staff. And Florida State, I know they've been on a downward trajectory lately, but it's still Florida State. They have a lot of passion and tradition, and obviously, they recruit very well historically. So I think Florida is obviously number 2. They just won a title this century as well, with obviously under Urban Meyer. And then for me, third is Penn State. They haven't won a national championship since 1986, going back to Joe Paterno. And honestly, I think we'll get into this a little bit later. I think Penn State fucked up firing James Franklin. I don't understand it. I think their plan was to go all in on Kurt Cignetti, but then immediately when they fired Franklin, they signed Cignetti to that huge new extension. He says he wants to be an Indiana lifer. He's going to stay at Indiana. I think after that, you probably maybe move to Lane Kiffin. I don't think that's a very good fit. And then after that, maybe you go after Matt Rule, but he just signed that extension today with Nebraska. And I get it. He's an alum from Penn State. That would have made sense. But honestly, I feel like if you're Penn State, no matter who you hire, is going to be a downgrade from James Franklin. I don't think they appreciate what he did for that program, bringing it out of the Sandusky scandal the way that he did and making them a perennial top 10 national title contending team. I know they never won it, but they were in the semifinal last year. And then you just fire him for 2 bad losses after taking Oregon to double overtime. Like, it just, to me, it felt very impulsive. And I don't think they had a real plan. I think Cignetti was probably the plan. And then after Cignetti signed the new extension, they're like, oh shit, we're caught with our dick in our hand. I don't, wherever James Franklin goes, I'm going to be more excited about that program's trajectory than I am with whoever Penn State hires. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely too. And, for those of you who watch, you guys know that, the 2 teams I primarily cover have been Florida and Penn State. So I feel like I've kind of been sucker punched this season in general, having to deal with this not once, but twice. So, I'm still kind of figuring that out, let's say. But,
what do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean?
Like I grew up about 2 hours away from Penn State, and, I've been covering Florida for years too, since I went to school down there. So those are kind of like my 1-2 in terms of teams. That's why this whole conversation has kind of been a whirlwind for me in general, just as a fan.
But 2 things can be true, because I made this argument going back to the offseason. Like Penn State, they had a lot of returning talent. They were a preseason top 5 team. There was a lot of high expectations for them. But I never understood it. I never bought into the hype, because it's not Alabama. It's not Georgia. You just lost 2 first-round draft picks, your 2 best players in Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren. In what world are you a better football team than you were last year when you no longer have those guys on the roster? And that was always my argument. Like, I never thought they were a serious national title contender. I thought last year was the year, and I think that's been proven out. But 2 things can be true. Like, you can not be a national title contender, but James Franklin is still a hell of a football coach. And you're not going to get an upgrade over James Franklin. You're just not.
Yeah, because I agree with you in 2 respects, right? I agree that LSU is definitely the top job, just because we talked about this in terms of the in-state recruiting, in terms of the success that you have, in terms of some of the best fans in the entire country, more or less for their passion, not so much for, obviously there's going to be a lot of pressure no matter what. But, I would also rank Florida and Penn State as my, 2 and 3. But I guess, Penn State is kind of the more fascinating conversation, in the sense of, yes, I agree with you too. I think the whole James Franklin thing is premature. And I love James Franklin. I've probably spent more time on this show than I should have defending him a lot of the time, more or less, because every year I get excited for the Penn State Ohio State game, and then
this weekend, by the way.
Which is this weekend. My ass will be glued to the couch watching that game. But nevertheless, I always had a fantasy of Penn State finally pulling off that victory, and it was just a relapse of just short. But now that he's not there anymore, and I kind of think to myself, well, who else would you bring in that's worth, not only would be an upgrade considerably to James Franklin, but also worth getting rid of him for $50 million? And for me, like, Matt Rule doesn't excite me in the sense that I need
he's
to
a
see
Timu James Franklin.
Exactly. So it's not only that, but you're also, he's really good friends with athletic director Pat Kraft. So that was kind of part of it. But now he has the extension, and his family's happy in Nebraska. I think that's better for him there anyway. I know the name that I've thrown out that I would be, I guess, somewhat okay with is Matt Campbell over at Iowa State. And I get, they went into the season being a top 20 team, and they obviously lost a couple corners. So, take that with a grain of salt. But, at Penn State is just kind of in a vulnerable spot too, right? Because they spent so much money renovating Beaver Stadium. You brought up a couple seconds ago about how James Franklin kind of got him out of the whole Sandusky scandal. Bill O'Brien deserved a shout out too there, by the way.
Yeah, he
but
does.
but yeah, that's kind of where you're at if you're Penn State, because and by the way, in terms of the Big Ten, it's not only Ohio State and Michigan anymore. I think
It's
USC
Oregon.
is gonna come up and surprise some people. They're still in the top 3 in terms of recruiting class for 2026. So I think Penn State is just gonna have to be really calculated in terms of who they bring in, and obviously just someone who grew up very close to the area.
They weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You have to bring in somebody who has a connection to that area of the country, and it's tough because someone who grew up in the Northeast, people care about the NFL up there. It's just not the same way that it is down south, and I think you would agree with that too.
I agree. And then you asked, I know I kind of ignored the second part of your question. You asked like the best fits for each program. I think LSU, we talked about it on the LSU episode. I think you need to bring in a guy that really understands, like, not necessarily like Louisiana culture, but like Southern culture, like how hard you have to go at recruiting and locking down the state of Louisiana and going into Texas and, Alabama, maybe even Florida, and trying to pick some of those kids. And I think you need a guy that understands how to build a culture and, who can rally everyone together. I said Brent Key. I thought Brent Key would be really, really good there. For Florida, I don't think Lane Kiffin would be a good fit at Florida, because just the pressure and the expectations, I think, would be too high. And I don't think he could be his quirky self there unless he's just winning every game, which, maybe, but I don't think they would tolerate him as much as Ole Miss does. Ole Miss is perfect for Lane Kiffin because he's not a great recruiter. I think he knows that, which is why he goes so hard in the transfer portal. He has a really good GM that helps him with that, and he has really good staff. But in the state of Florida and at a program like Florida, you have to recruit the hell out of the state. You have to be constantly recruiting and trying to get all that talent to come to Gainesville. And I don't know if that'd be a good fit for him. Plus all the pressure and the expectations would just be too high. You have to live in the shadow of Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. Like Lane Kiffin, he's already done the big time blue blood, quote unquote programs.
Exactly.
He was at Tennessee. He got tarmacked at USC. I think Ole Miss is perfect for him. So if you're Florida, I go after a guy like Eli Drinkwitz. I think Eli Drinkwitz would be perfect for Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I know, at least for me, this name's not being thrown out enough, but I would be very excited if Jedd Fisch from Washington came to Florida. I think he makes a lot of sense. He's been an NFL coordinator for a number of teams. He is, an offensive guy, kind of similar to Billy Napier. I think he's earned his stripes at a number of different collegiate programs, not just in the NFL. And, most importantly, he's an alumni there. And I think that's kind of what's missing for me in terms of, what Florida kind of needs, more or less, because, yeah, they've kind of gambled on the Jim McElwains previously and the Will Muschamps and all that. But I think Jedd Fisch, to me, just in terms of, a Florida guy, and he's not a home run guy. He's not a John Gruden or an Eli Drinkowitz, for example, or a Lane Kiffin. But if you want someone in there, and the people of Gainesville just need to be a little more patient with them. But I think Jedd Fisch could be a guy that could really be a strong fit.
Do you think he would be able to recruit the way that they'd want him to, though?
Well, I think that's really the Achilles heel of that. Is I'm more concerned about what Jedd Fisch, his defensive staff, I think, is what you're really more concerned about, because he knows the X's and O's. Washington, he's done a pretty solid job at building Washington back up ever since Kalen DeBoer went to Alabama, so he deserves that kind of credit. But Washington and Florida are just two different animals. You know what I mean? But I think it just kind of comes down to how patient Florida can be with Jedd Fisch, and I know it kind of sounds ironic of me saying that, given that they're are chasing national championships every year. But I think if you're a Florida fan, you have to have some level of that if you want a guy like Jedd Fisch or Eli Drinkowitz to come in. You can't expect him to walk in and go 11-1 the first year.
I think Florida fans forget this because the way he left really soured them in a lot of their minds. But Dan Mullen came in and went to 3 straight New Year's Six bowl games. They were winning 10 games a year under Dan Mullen, but they hated him because he wasn't that great of a recruiter.
Oh, well, that's why I don't like him.
Yeah, but in at that program, you have to be on the forefront of recruiting, and that's why I think Eli Drinkwitz is such a great fit there, because he got Missouri to be first in the NIL space. They went to the Missouri State Legislature and said, "Hey, let's put some NIL legislations in place where if you're committed to the University of Missouri, you can get paid in high school." And that was fucking genius. No one else had ever thought of that, which is why they're able to get and keep all these in-state kids that were going out of state and not even considering Missouri. They got Luther Burden because of that. And so many other guys, and they've been able to build that roster up through NIL. And that was Drink. Drink did that. And I think at Florida, he'd have a lot more success because they'd have so much more access to real, legit talent. And I think at Florida, you have to be able to recruit. Like, that has to be a real thing, that you hit the pavement hard and you go out and you see as many kids and recruit as many kids as possible. And I don't know if Jedd Fisch would do that.
Yeah, because I guess I agree with everything Eli Drinkowitz has done. I think the one thing that's going to slow him down in terms of the Florida job is Florida was kind of on the back burner in terms of implementing NIL to begin with. They took the route of, hey, we're going to upgrade in our facilities. We're going to upgrade in the coaching staff. We're going to upgrade everything else except the NIL. And I think a lot of people are kind of seeing, hey, it doesn't necessarily work that way anymore, because you see the Texas A&Ms of the world, you see the Texas Techs of the world who are doing NIL and then getting other funds out there for the facilities, for all of that stuff too. So that's another thing worth mentioning. If you do bring in a guy like Eli Drinkowitz, I think he's going to have a big learning curve in terms of all of that things don't happen as quickly in Florida as they do in Missouri, for example.
But he was leading that charge in Missouri. He said, we need to do this. And I think if you brought him in, you'd have to have the expectation of he's going to drive us to do that and to get this structure put in place. Because look, man, Florida State, they don't recruit high school very well. So you've already got an edge over that. And plus, their coaching staff is in flux. We don't know what the future is going to hold for Mike Norvell. Miami, Mario Cristobal, you could argue, is one of the best recruiters in the country. And they really, really, really value recruiting. And that is a recruiting staff that they have put together to dominate the state of Florida. So you're going to have to compete with that. But still, look, man, it's Florida. You've got all the resources. It's in the SEC. You can win national championships there. I think that'd be really attractive to a guy like Drink, if he can just kind of modernize the infrastructure of the program.